Hello and good evening, everybody. Today I'm speaking to Dr. Pali Lehola. He's at the University of Johannesburg. He's the former Statistician General of South Africa. So he's got a lot of brains in a microeconomic model. And the other night I looked at a lecture of him where he was giving a lecture on a series of paths forward for South Africa in terms of development. And I found this to be very interesting. And I think, ironically, we got to the same conclusion through different paths. So welcome, sir.
No, thank you very much.
Yeah. So I'm going to explain to you my perspective and how I see it, and then
Mm.
I want your as an economist view. So I take a historical perspective of South Africa. South Africa was conquered through a variety of people, the British, then the Afrikaners, and then it became the democratic dispensation, to sum it up very quickly. And what I realized after studying in France, and I didn't appreciate it, is how much the Afrikaner generals in the beginning of the last century was influenced by French military thought. In particular, they studied the works of a man by the name of André Boffre, and I was unaware how much this influenced South African military thought at the time. So Boffre came with the idea of a grand strategy, a survival of the state. If a state was ever infiltrated or attacked, how will it survive? And he came with the idea of what was called nuclear deterrence. So I have a weapon, you have a weapon, now we talk because the price is too costly for us both. But South Africa applied this strategy to our Water Resources Management Act and to Eskom. Now, the best example of this is our relationship with Lesotho. They give us water, we give them electricity. So if they turn off the taps, we turn off the lights. So it's too costly, so we're forced into cooperation. And a lot of the Eskom and the infrastructure throughout South Africa was planned with geopolitical purposes in mind. And it's an interesting thing that the Afrikaner rulers at the time saw themselves as in charge of South Africa, actually had a strategy of cooperation. And it's my belief that the logic of this strategy eventually forced them into cooperation with the ANC. They didn't want to, they thought they could cooperate and control, which was impossible. So that is how I came to the plan, to the idea. And then in terms of development, it means that Eskom has always been the central role of South Africa's development through high intensity energy. So I came to it through this perspective as a civil engineer, and I'm sort of going to give you like how you come to it as an economist, basically.
Very interesting. I mean, this perspective is absolutely insightful, which means even though they oppressed, there was always a level of cooperation that undergirded the thinking. Obviously, rather than lose all, then you better cooperate and then move forward. Now, that nexus seems to have been lost in terms of delivering that cooperation so that we can move forward. And in many ways, everybody suffers. There are short-term gains for those who have a lot of money, who have benefited from this, and they can always go and resettle somewhere else. But everybody else, for all reasons, actually suffers because of lack of that cooperation, which, as you point out, that it is this fear of loss, or not fear of loss, but the reality of a zero-sum game that forces everybody to cooperate. And then you need the instruments to enforce that cooperation, both the instruments at the level of defining the cooperation, but also material instruments that impact life. So Lesotho high lands water and electricity from South Africa. So the mutual cooperation grounded on mutual respect, but informed not by by small things, but by economic realities. That's a very interesting precept that you are putting on the table. Mm.
Yeah, so the purpose of it has been that it means nothing in negotiation if there's nothing delivered. If you say we're going to cooperate, there must be a form of cooperation. There must be a gift, if you will, or there must be something. And then the cooperation between the communities is, in my view, the strategy for South Africa to survive. Because as you know, even today, we still have variety groups and peoples who can easily be exploited by great powers, by demagogues, all of those things to pivot people against each other. And my view is if the basis of cooperation becomes the strategy of the survival of the state, the state will become blocked from being taken over by foreign infiltration or by local opposition. So that's sort of how I would take it from there. But what I would like to ask you then is I spoke to you the other night about the Asian tiger model for South Africa, and you responded saying this is a very attractive model for South Africa. Why would you say that?
I mean, ironically, one has to learn from apartheid itself, because it worked its way. Although then that was between the British and the Afrikaners. They had to cooperate, of course, at the cost of blacks, but cooperated at the level of material development of South Africa, putting down the necessary infrastructure and so on. And by 1945, South Africa had a signaling rail signaling. I mean, it was sophisticated for its time. It was well ahead of its time. Singapore and all these other countries were nowhere to be seen, such as Korea itself. Yet when you look at what they did, and I just need to step back a bit, and they say that the Asian tigers, particularly China, placed its thinking on the Qing dynasty 5,000 years ago, where Qing was saying, use the light, use the heavy, use that which is heavy to shoot at that which is light. And combined with that, that which was heavy at the time was the evergreen, ever normal granary that ensure that China doesn't go into famine, which ironically went into famine during Mao Zedong's time because of the Green Revolution and all of the revolution that he tried to implement, and it undermined this ever normal granary. So when you look at the Qing dynasty of that which is strong to shoot at that which is light, it's exactly what Smuts and Bale did to execute the industrialization mission. And they planned in the detail, and I want to draw on Mandela here, when he wrote From Prison to Adelaide Tambo, where he said, significant progress can always be made if only we plan in the detail, such that when matters of fate emerge or come on us, they come on us upon our own terms. So there was Bale and the Smuts planning in the detail that when the Second World War broke, South Africa was the hub of manufacturing and everything without being involved physically in their space in the war, except in Namibia. But the entirety of South Africa, as it was, never involved in so. And so when fate came, it came favorably to South Africa, and therefore it could industrialize faster using the exigencies of war to supply. And then, of course, Smuts was the vice to the premier of the UK, Prime Minister of the UK, as we know, and was part of the committee there. So he could channel things, development to South Africa. So basically, Smuts was very smart at all times to see how he benefits South Africa, even in terms of war. So this model, you see the Chinese being very opportunistic in the way they drive their economies. I mean, I've been on the board of the World Bank, or rather the International Comparisons Program. I've seen this intelligent self-interest, whereby China would not accept that from that program, International Comparisons Program, it was the biggest economy. They refused flat out.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a whole story behind it of my role in getting
but
us.
there's something else I want to add into the dialogue, which is missing, and South Africans will appreciate it today, which is energy. If you look at the conclusions that the Europeans made from the Industrial Revolution, it was free markets, it was property rights, it was labor, it was capital, all these things economists talk about. Now, that paradigm, there was two paradigms, more or less the Keynesian School of Economics and the Chicago School of Economics, which came in Friedman. In my view, they've both been disproven by the works of Anthony Wrigley, which is the low entropy theory of wealth. And ironically, Japan was the first nation outside of the West to industrialize. Okay, the Japanese went to learn from the Europeans, and what did they figure out? They said it's got nothing to do with your kings, it's got nothing to do with your laws, it's got nothing to do with your trade, it's got to do with energy. It's got to do with the fact that you discovered coal. And it is the Japanese Asian elites are very hesitant about the transition, if you would call it that, because they understand the logic of the Industrial Revolution is towards a more entropy, lower entropy form of fuel. So it's energy and infrastructure that doesn't move. It's energy and industry, and it's that type of heavy industry which it makes the thinking. And this was the same conclusion that Hendrik van der Bijl had when he studied the New Deal in America, because he worked for General Electric. He took it back to South
Oh
Africa.
yes. Yeah.
So it's the centrality of energy to solving the country's
now
economy.
you're moving me into a different trajectory on energy, because if we think about the real industrial revolution, there are only two industrial revolutions, although others say that there is a fourth industrial revolution. Actually, there are only two, which is coal. All industrial revolutions are driven by energy. Coal, nuclear. Those two are central. Now, we are looking at the third. There isn't a third. I mean, information technology is benefited from nuclear energy, and nuclear made information technology possible because of the embeddedness of the units of energy from nuclear that are embedded in our cell phones and so on, and also in health, medicine, and everything. That's nuclear. There is a third form of energy that is on the horizon, and it's based on Tesla's theory of abundant energy in air. And there is, I think might be aware of Maisetsenko cycle, M-cycle. Maisetsenko has realized that energy now. There are about 4,000 publications, whereby through just the movement of air and water, indirect evaporative cooling, he can actually now cool below wet bulb by that indirect evaporative cooling to dew point. And that itself has infinite possibilities, because you can manage heat, whatever amount of heat there is, to convert it into cooling. And if you reverse that process, you've actually gotten the complete thought by Tesla that you can draw energy from air. So I'm convinced, as my colleague Moja Murphy, who is based in Toronto, that the third industrial revolution will be based on the M-cycle conception of energy, which is based on Tesla. And that is going to be a big industrial revolution that Africa should not be left behind. That's a very, it's and we've been working with Maise Sengwa. We invited he came here to South Africa to my house, and we sat for 3 weeks. And then we are at the Rand show to just show these instruments, because he's converted that thought of Tesla into real instruments that then can industrialize. So it's no longer a theory, it's actually the technology of cooling that replaces your condensers, your compressors, your refrigerants, and all these into a real energy products that through indirect evaporative cooling make you cool from wet bulb to dew point. So your point about energy is so real.
Well,
And
yeah,
that we are playing
I
with
put it to you in
coal at the
economic
moment.
terms. I put it to you in economic language. What is GDP measure? It's always a statistic nobody understands. It measures low entropy energy. That's it.
Oh yeah.
GDP per capita is energy. Okay, if you understand that, you understand what we're talking about here. So the problem I have with the current policy proposals by the PCC and the government is this: they're proposing something which seems to me counterintuitive to the logic of the Industrial Revolution. The logic of the Industrial Revolution was moving towards more denser, more lower entropy fields. And here we are talked of all these wind and solar things that last only 15 years can be replaced. And I'm saying, well, as an engineer, I know everything that moves, anything of high entropy, runs into fatigue. It will die one day. You want to maintain it in a low entropy state. So why are we moving away from the logic of the Industrial Revolution? What is it that easy? And my view is that the current elites making the decisions do not understand development in its physical sense. They understand it in an abstract economic sense, but they have not understand the physics of it.
Well, that's where when you don't understand these things at the data level. I mean, you are introducing me to a very interesting concept around how and we, myself, Moja, and I are convinced, and so is my Sesengo, saying that this is the new civilization based on Tesla's laws of energy. That energy is abundant in the air. And because air is always there, you just need to harvest this energy. And it's stable, it's everything. So basically, I mean, you have just introduced a very strong concept for me on this.
But I'm glad I could contribute to that. But I want to just stick on this Asian tiger model. So ANC comes into power in 1994, although there were negotiations before, even for transition, with a transitional government. And they adopt a school of thought that comes out of Chicago, basically, for South Africa, which is, the market deregulation thing. It wasn't entire deregulation. They had gear under Thabo Mbeki, and on Jacob Zuma, I'm not sure what we had. I don't think anyone still understands what Jacob Zuma's policy was. But, and consequently, the institutions that the apartheid regime left over, which was Eskom, Transnet, those things, they seem to have fallen into a bit of decay. Now, my argument has been that is because we put South Africa on the wrong developmental path. And I'd like to have your view on that.
Oh, yes, it's very true. I mean, look, this shooting that with that which is shooting with that which is strong to that which is light informed Bale and then Smarts. And that's why they built these strong institutions that were public, which is because they are strong, they are stable, they will shoot at the volatile private sector that today likes this, tomorrow likes something else. But when we have that draft, it's very important. And I think the wisdom that was in that is, as they constructed these things, they also embedded education in them. In that Eskom, Transnet, or Spoornet, and all those were training institutions themselves. So they could renew themselves. Because if they don't have a strong research which is associated with training others, then they will be moribund. But then when the government 1994 came in, it destroyed not only those institutions, but the training part. Because in training and providing the technical knowledge, you would de-risk for business the people that you have trained. Once they know you are from Eskom, they know there's nothing more they can ask for. They get to employ. Yeah. Now, by separating the training from those SOEs, particularly in the technical fields where you produce things, was the biggest disservice. And that was the beginning of the hollowing out of these institutions. I mean, not to mention the fact that we had a nuclear bomb. We didn't just use it. So, as Maoka would say, we are well ahead of the curve. Yes. And today, we know we need nuclear, yet we are opposing nuclear.
But let me ask you this. Who is opposing nuclear? Okay, when I speak to Afrikaners back home, they're in favor of nuclear. When I speak to the unions, they're in favor of nuclear. When I speak
the NGOs...
But who are they? They don't speak. They're not South Africans. They get...
Well, I mean, they have a very powerful voice. Even though the justices did not say nuclear is bad, it's wrong. The adjudication was around the suspicion that they had around the non-transparency of who was to produce the energy. That morphed in the public domain to be victory against nuclear, when it was victory against what was perceived as corrupt. And then, of course, everybody got cold feet. So nuclear was said to cost us 1.23 trillion for constructing it. So the whole thing, the whole media industry pushed itself in the face of Zuma's idea of going nuclear. When actually the cases was adjudicated on the basis that the tendering process of those who were to construct this was not transparent. But it morphed into something else, including that nuclear is not affordable. And of course, if you give the Treasury that power when they are just accountants and they're probably economists, then they go into fields such as energy and so on. You allow them power that they don't have. And I think under apartheid, in the Treasury, there must have been a nuclear scientist there. They wouldn't leave that to chance. They would have placed these people in strategic positions so that strategic decisions around expenditure, when they are made, they are well informed by the fields of science. We don't have that kind of architecture.
You see, yes and no. Under the apartheid regime, they were always technical people because the Afrikaners prided themselves on being technical people. So it was a cultural thing. But the Afrikaners also made the wrong conclusion, which is they said it was our language that allowed for development, which was not entirely true. Language played a unifying role among the community, but it was actually energy. Okay, so they also had the right answer using the wrong. They didn't have the right answer.
Wrong.
You call it a
Well,
metaphoric truth, I think. You know, you get the
I
right
had a
answer even though
discussion
you're wrong.
with.
Yes.
I had a discussion with Boshoff. I went to Orania. You know, I ran the census, so I have to count everybody. So I went to Boshoff, and we had I thought I was going to spend up just a few minutes with Boshoff because of just said this repugnant institution called Orania. How do I sit with them? But I sat there with him. We covered everything, and he showed me around him was his engineer, his medical profession, and a few other professions, technical professions in there were there. And then, of course, he's a propagandist. All for, I spent the whole day. We had a very strong discussion around how apartheid and his style of apartheid is not going to survive. Whatever he thinks, he may survive another 10 years, 15 years, but in the long run, he's not going to. He was convinced that he will. I haven't visited him in 10 years, but the plan that he had and the municipality, it was a very powerful plan, including on how he may buy time and survive another number of years, because he said, well, we'll recruit people, right-wing people. Well, he didn't call them right-wing. He said those who look like us and they think like us will be recruited to come to this. The point I'm making is that when you think strategically, you actually meet your goals, whatever those goals are. But it is always best to have benevolent, and it is right to have benevolent and just to have benevolent goals. But Boshoff's goals are repugnant. But he's succeeding because he's been
it's out
given a
of
space.
date. He was totally out of date with reality.
Yeah.
But they can continue. I don't know what's. You see, the thing is, their children study where University of Pretoria and Potchefstroom. So eventually they will have to be forced to cooperate anyway. So you know, I don't know what's going to happen. But you know, so get on this developmental path. I mean, obviously, given your former position, you're obviously still in contact with people in government and decision makers. When you present these arguments to them to say, guys, we need to realize that the developmental path South Africa has had mistakes, what conclusions do they make? What answers do they give you?
You remember I presented on the Indula Meeting and the 6-pillar policy.
Yes.
We presented this to private sector. And the private sector
think I've just lost him in the conversation, which is quite unfortunate. Let's just wait a few seconds. Right, we have load shedding. I'll come back a bit later. Thank you everyone for listening. We can continue this some other time.